It was the year AD 54. Rome stood at the peak of its power, ruling over vast lands from Britain to the Near East. Marble temples gleamed in the sun, legions guarded the borders, and the city believed itself eternal. On October 13 of that year, Emperor Claudius died suddenly, officially from natural causes. Within hours, a boy of just 16 years was declared ruler of the Roman Empire. His name was Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. To the public, this moment seemed like a peaceful transfer of power. To those who understood the palace, it marked the beginning of one of the darkest reigns in Roman history. Nero did not rise alone. Standing behind him was his mother, Agrippina the Younger, one of the most formidable women Rome had ever known. She was the great-granddaughter of Augustus, sister of Emperor Caligula, and wife of Claudius. She had spent years navigating court intrigue, eliminating rivals, and shaping the succession. Ancient historians such as Tacitus and Suetonius strongly suggest that Claudius did not die naturally. They describe poisoned mushrooms prepared under Agrippina's watch, administered at a dinner meant to secure Nero's future. Whether exaggerated or true, the story reveals how contemporaries understood Agrippina's ambition. From the very beginning, Nero's rule was inseparable from his mother's influence. Coins were struck showing both their faces. Agrippina attended Senate meetings, listened behind curtains, and issued commands as if she were co-emperor. For Rome, this was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. Women of influence existed, but none had ruled so openly. For Nero, still young and impressionable, her dominance was both protective and suffocating. In the early years, Nero's reign appeared promising. Guided by the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, the government reduced taxes, discouraged corruption, and presented a humane image. Public executions declined, games and spectacles entertained the masses, the Senate enjoyed relative respect. Many later Romans would look back on these first years as the best part of Nero's rule. But beneath the surface, tension was growing. Nero was not interested in governance. He dreamed of poetry, music, theatre, and chariot racing. He longed for admiration not as an emperor, but as an artist. Agrippina, however, expected obedience and political seriousness. Their visions for power were incompatible. The conflict became personal when Nero fell in love with a freedwoman named Acte. Agrippina viewed this relationship as an insult and a threat. She demanded that Nero abandon Acte and reminded him constantly of how she had placed him on the throne. Ancient accounts describe her threatening to support Britannicus, Claudius's biological son, as an alternative emperor. That threat was fatal. In early AD 55, Britannicus collapsed and died during a banquet. Witnesses described violent convulsions. Nero claimed it was an epileptic seizure, but few believed him. Tacitus records widespread suspicion of poison administered on Nero's orders. With Britannicus gone, Agrippina lost her strongest weapon. From that point onward, Nero began systematically stripping his mother of power. She was removed from the palace guard, excluded from political meetings, and eventually forced to live outside Rome. Yet even in isolation, Agrippina remained dangerous. Her lineage, wealth, and reputation meant she could still inspire rebellion. Nero's fear of his mother turned into obsession. Roman historians describe his growing paranoia, fueled by advisors who warned that Agrippina would never accept humiliation. Several attempts were made to kill her quietly. One plan involved a specially designed boat meant to collapse at sea. In Ad 59, Nero invited Agrippina to a festival near the Bay of Naples, and arranged for her return voyage on this vessel. The plan failed. The boat partially collapsed, but Agrippina swam to shore and survived. When news reached Nero, panic set in. According to Tacitus, he realized there was no turning back. If she lived, she would expose him. Later that night, soldiers were sent to her villa. Agrippina reportedly understood what was happening the moment they arrived. Ancient sources record her final words as she exposed her body and said, "Strike my womb, the womb that bore Nero." Whether literal or symbolic, the message was clear. Rome's most powerful woman was murdered by order of her own son. The Senate was informed that Agrippina had been killed while plotting against the emperor. Official decrees praised Nero for saving the state, but Rome was not convinced. Whispers spread quickly. The idea of matricide violated Roman moral codes at the deepest level. Even tyrants were expected to respect family bonds. After his mother's death, Nero was free, but also unanchored. Suetonius writes that he was haunted by nightmares and visions of Agrippina's ghost, yet outwardly, his behavior grew more extreme. Without her restraint, Nero indulged fully in his artistic fantasies. He performed publicly as a singer and actor, something considered disgraceful for an emperor. He raced chariots, competed in Greek festivals, and demanded applause under threat of punishment. Rome began to feel the strain. The treasury drained under extravagant games and construction projects. The Senate lost influence. Executions returned. Fear replaced optimism. All of this set the stage for the event that would forever define Nero's legacy. In July AD 64, just 5 years after his mother's murder, Rome would burn, and Nero's name would be bound to that fire for the rest of history. It was the night of July 18, AD 64. Summer heat clung to Rome like a suffocating cloak, and the city lay restless beneath a moonlit sky. Rome at this time was a crowded maze of wooden apartments, narrow streets, workshops, taverns, and marketplaces packed tightly together. Fire was a constant danger. Oil lamps burned through the night. Kitchens used open flames, and merchants stored flammable goods beneath their homes. Everyone knew a great fire would come someday. No one imagined how complete the destruction would be. The fire began near the Circus Maximus, in the southeastern part of the city, where shops selling oil, cloth, and grain lined the track. According to Tacitus, strong winds quickly carried the flames through the tightly packed neighborhoods. Within hours, entire districts were ablaze. The fire moved faster than people could flee. Buildings collapsed. Streets turned into walls of fire. Families were separated in the smoke. Some were crushed as crowds panicked. Others were trapped in their homes, unable to escape. Rome burned for 6 days and 7 nights. Out of the city's 14 districts, 3 were completely destroyed. 7 more were severely damaged. Only 4 remained largely untouched. Ancient accounts describe people watching helplessly as temples, ancestral homes, and public monuments vanished into ash. Sacred shrines dating back centuries were lost. The physical memory of Rome's past was erased in a single week. Where was Nero? This question haunted Rome almost immediately. Nero was not in the city when the fire broke out. He was at his villa in Antium, roughly 35 miles away. When news reached him, he returned to Rome. Tacitus records that Nero opened public buildings and gardens to shelter the homeless, organized food distribution, and lowered grain prices. These actions suggest a ruler attempting damage control. Yet rumors spread faster than flames. Many Romans claimed that while the city burned, Nero watched from the palace of Maecenas, dressed in theatrical costume, singing about the fall of Troy. The image became legendary. Later historians like Suetonius repeated it, though Tacitus expressed uncertainty. Whether Nero truly sang during the fire remains debated. What mattered more was that people believed he could have. The belief did not emerge from nothing. Nero had already shocked Roman society with his public performances. He craved applause. He demanded admiration. The idea that he would turn catastrophe into theatre seemed believable to a population already uneasy with his behavior. Suspicion deepened when reports surfaced that some men were preventing citizens from extinguishing the fire. According to Tacitus, these men claimed they acted under orders. They threw torches into buildings and threatened those who resisted. Whether these men truly represented imperial authority or were opportunistic criminals remains unclear. But in the chaos, the distinction mattered little. Fear turned into rage. As the fire finally subsided, Rome stood broken. Hundreds of thousands were homeless, the poor suffered the most, having lost everything, bodies lay unburied, disease spread, food shortages loomed, and above it all stood Nero, emperor of a city reduced to ruins. Then came the rebuilding plans. Nero announced sweeping architectural reforms. Streets would be widened. Buildings would use stone instead of wood. Fire breaks would be added. These measures, on their own, were sensible. But Nero also claimed large tracts of land in the city center to build an enormous palace complex known as the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. This palace was unprecedented. Artificial lakes, gardens, gilded halls, and a colossal statue of Nero himself dominated the design. To many Romans the message was unmistakable. Their homes had burned, and in their place rose the emperor's personal paradise. Anger hardened into certainty. Nero must have wanted the fire. Whether he ordered it or not, Nero understood that public opinion had turned dangerously against him. He needed someone to blame. The solution he chose would have consequences far beyond his reign. He accused a small, unpopular religious group of starting the fire. They were called Christians. At this time, Christianity was poorly understood and widely distrusted. Christians refused to worship Roman gods or the emperor. They met in secret. They spoke of a coming judgment and a kingdom not of this world. Rumors accused them of cannibalism and immorality, based on misunderstandings of their rituals. Nero declared them enemies of Rome. Tacitus provides one of the earliest non-Christian accounts of the persecution. He describes Christians being arrested, tortured, and executed in grotesque ways. Some were covered in animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others were crucified. Many were burned alive at night to serve as human torches in Nero's gardens. Even Romans who disliked Christians felt uneasy. Tacitus notes that sympathy arose, not because the victims were innocent in the eyes of the state, but because the punishment was excessive and cruel. The spectacle revealed something deeply wrong in the empire's soul. The persecution temporarily shifted blame away from Nero, but it did not restore trust. Too much had been lost. Too many questions remained unanswered. Financial strain now worsened the situation. Rebuilding Rome required enormous funds. Nero debased the currency, reducing the silver content of coins. Taxes increased. Provincial governors were pressured to extract more revenue. Discontent spread beyond Rome itself. Meanwhile, Nero's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He traveled to Greece to compete in artistic contests, forcing judges to award him victories. He delayed military affairs. He executed senators on suspicion alone. Informants flourished. Fear returned to the heart of Roman politics. The fire had not only destroyed buildings, it had burned away the illusion of Nero as a benevolent ruler. What remained was a ruler isolated from his people, clinging to spectacle, surrounded by flatterers, and haunted by the crimes that had brought him to absolute power. Rome would be rebuilt, but it would never be the same, and Nero's fate, like the city he ruled, was moving steadily toward collapse. By the late AD 60s, the Roman Empire was no longer governed by confidence or tradition. It was ruled by fear, spectacle, and exhaustion. The Great Fire had marked a turning point, but it did not stand alone. It was part of a broader unraveling of Nero's authority, a slow collapse driven by mistrust, financial strain, and the emperor's growing detachment from reality. After the fire, Nero's need for admiration intensified. He believed himself destined not just to rule Rome, but to redefine greatness through art. Ancient Roman values held that public performance was beneath the dignity of the ruling class. To sing, act, or compete in games was the role of slaves and professionals, not emperors. Nero rejected this entirely. In AD 66, he embarked on a grand tour of Greece, the cultural heartland of the ancient world. Entire athletic and artistic calendars were rearranged so Nero could compete in every major festival. Olympic Games were postponed, rules were bent or ignored. Judges awarded Nero victory after victory, regardless of performance. He returned to Rome with hundreds of crowns, declaring himself the greatest artist in history. While Nero chased applause abroad, the empire simmered. In Judea, rebellion erupted against Roman rule, leading to a brutal war that would culminate in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, after Nero's death. In Gaul and Spain, resentment grew as taxes increased and governors were squeezed for revenue. The army, long the backbone of imperial stability, began to question its loyalty. At the center of this decay was Nero's treatment of the Roman elite. The Senate, once a partner in governance, had become a stage for humiliation. Senators were forced to applaud Nero's performances. Dissent, real or imagined, was punished with exile or execution. Property confiscations became common, conveniently refilling Nero's depleted treasury. The atmosphere of suspicion peaked in AD 65 with the discovery of the Pisonian conspiracy. Led by Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a respected senator, the plot aimed to assassinate Nero and restore what conspirators believed was moral order. Whether the conspiracy was as large as Nero claimed remains uncertain. What is clear is how Nero responded. Executions followed in waves. Senators, knights, poets, philosophers, and officers were accused, often on flimsy evidence. Among the dead was Seneca, Nero's former tutor and advisor. Ordered to take his own life, Seneca complied with stoic calm, opening his veins in a final act of Roman dignity. His death symbolized the end of restraint within Nero's rule. With Seneca gone and Burrus already dead, Nero was surrounded by flatterers and opportunists. No one dared challenge him. Reality became whatever pleased the emperor. Public resentment now matched elite hostility. Ordinary Romans struggled with rising prices and shrinking opportunities. Veterans felt neglected. The poor remembered the fire and the golden house rising where their neighborhoods once stood. Nero's attempts at generosity, such as public games and grain distributions, felt hollow against the scale of suffering. In AD 68, the first open rebellion erupted. Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, declared Nero unfit to rule and called for support from other provincial leaders. Vindex was not seeking personal power. He appealed to the idea of restoring Roman dignity. Although Vindex was eventually defeated by loyal forces, his revolt exposed a critical truth. Opposition to Nero was no longer whispered. It was armed. Soon after, Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, joined the rebellion. Galba had something Nero no longer possessed, the support of legions. The Senate hesitated, watching closely. Loyalty to an emperor depended on strength, not bloodline alone. When Nero failed to act decisively, doubt turned into calculation. As news reached Rome, Nero's reaction was not strategic, but theatrical. Ancient sources describe him collapsing in despair, lamenting that the world would lose a great artist. He rehearsed speeches instead of issuing commands. He begged advisers for reassurance. Some abandoned him quietly. Others prepared for the inevitable. The Praetorian Guard, once fiercely loyal, negotiated with Galba. Promises of reward outweighed loyalty to a failing ruler. When the Guard withdrew its support, Nero's fate was sealed. On June 8, AD 68, the Senate declared Nero a public enemy. This was the ultimate condemnation. It stripped him of legitimacy and protection. He was to be executed according to ancient custom. Nero fled Rome in disguise, accompanied by a handful of servants. He hid in a villa outside the city, listening as messengers confirmed his abandonment. According to Suetonius, he struggled to accept reality. He hesitated. He panicked. He begged others to kill him. Finally, as soldiers approached, Nero ended his own life on June 9, AD 68, at the age of 30. His reported final words were, "What an artist dies in me." With his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. The line that began with Augustus collapsed in disgrace. Rome entered a year of chaos known as the Year of the Four Emperors, a violent struggle that proved how deeply Nero's reign had destabilized the empire. Yet Nero's legacy did not end with his death. Stories spread that he had not truly died. False Neros appeared in the East, gathering followers who believed the emperor would return. Fear and fascination lingered. The question remained, was Nero a monster, a misunderstood artist, or a product of absolute power without restraint? The answer lies not in myth alone, but in consequence. He murdered his mother to rule freely. He presided over a city's destruction and failed to earn trust in its rebuilding. He ruled through fear, spectacle, and indulgence. And in doing so, he taught Rome a lesson it would remember for centuries. Power without limits destroys both ruler and state. When dawn broke over Rome after Nero's death in June AD 68, the city awoke not to relief, but to uncertainty. There was no celebration, no grand closure. Instead, there was silence, broken only by rumors, fear, and confusion. For the first time in nearly a century, Rome had no clear ruler. The dynasty founded by Augustus had ended not with honor, but with disgrace, blood, and fire. Nero's death did not erase his impact, it exposed it. In the months that followed, Rome plunged into chaos. 4 emperors would rise and fall within a single year. Civil war spread across the empire. Legions fought legions. Provinces chose sides. The stability that Augustus had engineered was gone. Nero's reign had not merely been cruel or incompetent. It had weakened the very foundations of imperial authority. Yet history rarely delivers simple villains. To understand Nero's legacy, historians have had to separate fact from rumor, propaganda from reality, and moral outrage from political analysis. Ancient sources such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio painted Nero in brutal colors. They wrote under later emperors who benefited from condemning him. Their accounts emphasize his excesses, crimes, and madness. Nero, in their telling, became a symbol of tyranny itself. Modern historians approach Nero more cautiously. There is little doubt that Nero ordered the murder of his mother. This act alone violated Roman values so deeply that even hardened elites recoiled. Matricide was not just a crime, it was a moral abomination in Roman culture. That single decision permanently damaged Nero's legitimacy and shaped how every later action was interpreted. There is also little doubt that Nero ruled through fear in his later years. Executions, confiscations, informants, and terror became tools of governance. The Senate was humiliated, the aristocracy was traumatized, the army lost confidence, but some aspects of Nero's rule demand nuance. The Great Fire of Rome, for example, remains historically unresolved. No ancient source provides definitive proof that Nero ordered the fire. Tacitus himself admits uncertainty. Fires were common in Rome. The city structure made disaster inevitable. Nero's immediate relief efforts, though later overshadowed by his building projects, were real. The Domus Aurea, often cited as evidence of Nero's greed, was also a turning point in Roman architecture. Its innovative use of space, light, and concrete influenced later imperial construction. Ironically, later emperors built public monuments over it, attempting to erase Nero while benefiting from his engineering. Nero's persecution of Christians, however, left a lasting scar. Although Christianity was still a small movement, Nero's actions created the first state-sponsored persecution. This moment entered Christian memory as proof of Rome's cruelty, and Nero became, in later Christian tradition, the embodiment of evil power. Some early Christians even associated him with apocalyptic figures described in Scripture. This reputation endured. Medieval writers portrayed Nero as a demon. Renaissance thinkers used him as a warning against unchecked monarchy. Enlightenment philosophers cited him as proof that absolute power corrupts absolutely. In modern culture, Nero became a shorthand for madness, cruelty, and decadence. Yet even in condemnation, Nero remained fascinating. Coins bearing his image continued to circulate. False Neros appeared decades later in the eastern provinces, supported by people who remembered tax relief and entertainment rather than terror. This phenomenon reveals a divided memory. To Rome's elites, Nero was a nightmare. To some provincials, he was a ruler who challenged tradition and favored the common people. This contradiction explains why Nero's story still matters. Nero's reign forces historians to confront uncomfortable questions. How much of tyranny is personal and how much is structural? How does a system designed for stability fail so catastrophically? How does public image shape historical memory? Nero did not rule alone. He inherited a system that concentrated power in one individual without sufficient safeguards. Augustus created the Principate carefully, masking authority behind tradition. By Nero's time, the mask had slipped. The emperor was openly absolute. When that power fell into the hands of an insecure, indulgent, and emotionally unstable ruler, disaster followed. The murder of Agrippina removed the last force capable of restraining Nero. The Great Fire destroyed the city's physical heart. The persecutions shattered moral boundaries. The revolts revealed political collapse. Each event built upon the last. Nero did not simply watch Rome burn. He presided over the burning of trust, tradition, and restraint. His life demonstrates a timeless lesson. Power without accountability invites catastrophe. Art without discipline becomes vanity. Fear replaces loyalty when leadership loses legitimacy. That is why Nero endures. Not because he was uniquely evil, but because he shows what happens when authority, insecurity, and spectacle combine without limits. Rome survived Nero, but it was forever changed. The empire learned painfully that even an eternal city could burn from within. Nero died believing himself a misunderstood artist. History judged him differently, and Rome never forgot.